All right. So if these big picture discussions and questions are getting to you, this one is really going to blow your mind, or it's going to be at least it's the most expansive, arguably, of all the things we've talked about so far. So if you can believe there's something bigger than the existence of God, well, maybe this is it. So we're going to be talking about sacral ways of knowing, which is basically sacred ways of knowing. And you could say, well, religion is a sacred way of knowing something, but science is a process. It's not sacred at all. But if you think about the way that we think of science, it really is kind of the way that people thought about religion in the Middle Ages. Science belongs in the realm of experiments and proof and evidence. So I think what's interesting is religious people will say, okay, well, science can't really look at anything which is bigger than us, right? We are restricted by our ability to see and to think. And so we really can't consider things larger than ourselves given our own limitations in our mind and in our eyes and in our conceptions of thinking. Scientists will say, on the other hand, well, religion is just sort of a higher humbug. It's just a bunch of myths and wishful thinking on a very grand scale. So Brian Appleyard, who is a major thinker and obviously a religious man, is going to say that modern science views us as accidents. Basically, we're really lucky in our universe and in the process of evolution to exist. But in this way of thinking, modern man doesn't have a role in creation, and that science really is spiritually corrosive because it takes away the history of our belief and our traditions. And if you think about it, science leads to atheism, and atheism leads to despair, and despair leads to sadness and arguably even to suicide. So if you want to think about the purpose of an approach, a religious person would say religion provides us something. And so we want to see ourselves in a kind of a more glorious way. Now, Carl Sagan, a scientist, would say, well, science has surpassed religion in delivering awe because we now know how big and awesome the universe is. So God is greater than we could ever have thought he was before. It was before. So traditionally, religious people believe in a smaller God, and people who see reality through the presence of the universe say, well, let's make God bigger through our understanding of science. So science depends on an inductive process of thinking, generally speaking. There is deduction in science too, but this is basically saying the scientific process begins with observing things. We come up with questions, and then we come up with experiments to test those observations, and that test leads to theories. And so that process of induction is basically where our truth comes from. We get it from what we see. What I would like you to think about here, if you're working on your own, is how religious truths come to be. What is the essence of a religious truth, and what is the essence of a scientific truth? Religion tends to tend towards hierarchy and towards devotional, emotional, and holistic ways of thinking. Science is a little bit more tentative and cautious and piecemeal, but there's a lot more verification. So I want you to think about the essence of each approach and maybe brainstorm a few aspects of each way of thinking. I want you to also consider these questions. Can you be a scientific thinker and still experience wonder and awe in the world? Obviously, Carl Sagan would say, yes, you can. Can you be both religious and have a scientific understanding of the world? I'm assuming most of you believe in science, so can you still hold your belief in God or a belief and have that scientific world be part of that? And then do we also have to change our conception of God as our understanding of science changes? So one way of thinking about the existence of God in all of this is in the anthropic principle, and some of you read this last night or will read it. And essentially, this is suggesting that if you look at all of the factors that have to be in place, and they're all listed here, I'm not going to read them all, but essentially you have a whole lot of fixed physical forces that are in place so that human beings can exist and natural life can exist. And the probability of this is so small in one universe But the only way to explain this is that the universe exists by design. So if you're thinking about the existence of the universe, you have three choices. You can believe that there's only one universe, and if the physical laws that are basically a byproduct of a watchmaker in the form of God that creates this incredibly complex universe that we're in. You can believe that we just got really, really lucky, and if you believe in luck, then you have to believe that, again, that number, the odds of this universe existing are 1 in 10 raised to 2,685,000th power. And I don't know, I'm not a mathematician, but I would say it's probably a gazillion, something like that. So it's just a really small number. The chances are so small. Or, as some scientists have suggested, there are just a whole lot of universes. There are infinite number of universes, and if you think about infinity, at some point infinity is bigger than a gazillion, so you're going to get a universe that looks like ours. Obviously, this is totally in the realm of theoretical physics, not my strong point for sure. So what do we know about the universe from a scientific perspective? We know that the universe is a little more than 13.5 billion years old, still expanding from a singularity, which was the Big Bang, and it exploded into this gigantic universe that we are living in. And that this universe is defined by an incredible process of destruction and creation. You can think about this from a Hindu perspective, the Shiva destructive process and the creative process of Vishnu are interconnected. And a Hindu would say, of course they are. We've understood that all along. What do I mean by that? It means that as stars blow up in star nebulae, which create the matter that's in your body, so literally you were made of stardust, and the matter in your left hand probably comes from a different stardust than the matter in your right hand. So it's an incredible complexity of the creation of hydrogen. And so hydrogen clouds, which collapse into star nebulae, basically, so what you have is the destruction of stars leads to the explosion of matter, and then new matter coalesces into new things, which create new stars. And so this process is almost like the universe is breathing. An incredible thing if you think about it. So if you look at where we fit into this whole picture, we are spinning around the sun at about 67,000 miles an hour. So there we are in the lower right. Imagine we're spinning around at 67,000 miles an hour, while the Earth is also spinning at 1,000 miles an hour around its own axis. We're moving away from all other parts of the universe at about 872,000 miles an hour. And the Earth is moving through space at about a little more than 8 million miles an hour. If you can understand any of that, then you're a lot further along than I can. The point is, it's really hard to understand objectively where we are. It's just, you could say, well, that's just awesome and incredible. It's not terribly helpful on a day-to-day issues. So the point of this is that we just live in a massive universe with billions of galaxies, and we're just one of them. So we exist in a remote outpost of the universe and the edge of a galaxy, which is at the edge of the universe. And even when we see our Earth from above, it creates a sense of tremendous spiritual awakening. If you think about, well, if you take that out to the level of the universe, you realize we're living in a magnificent universe, and one that should be perhaps worshipped by itself. So if you look at this in terms of religion and science, obviously, as I mentioned earlier, religion is based in hierarchy, science is based in observation and intellectual pursuit. So I want you to think here, if you're working virtually, what is valued in a religious worldview? What is valued in a scientific worldview? What causes things to happen in religion? What causes things to happen in science? The most important thing is the advantages and criticisms. What is good about religion? What advantages does it give you, and what are the problems with it? And the same thing with science. What are the advantages of a scientific worldview, and what are the shortcomings of a scientific worldview? Or put simply, what's good about absolutist ways of thinking, and what's good about relativist ways of thinking? So if you think about things in a little bit more manageable time frames, we're still talking about billions of years. We're looking at a world that is a little more than 5 billion years old, that coalesced and eventually began evolution, something that science can't explain the process of evolution, can't explain the Cambrian explosion. But if you look at where we come in, obviously we're very, very late in the game in terms of the development of natural phenomenon on Earth. So the process of evolution, which is extremely complex, also is a miracle in itself. You could be a scientific thinker and say it's amazing that we go from essentially single-celled organisms to highly complex beings that can think about the types of things that we're thinking about today. Is just in itself kind of miraculous, as is a baby. The miracle of birth. There's something miraculous simply about how we come to be. And you know this if you've ever seen a baby. You were one once. You are yourself a miracle. So that's looking at things from a sort of a one way of looking at the cosmology. The other way of looking at things is from a quantum physics perspective, which kind of aligns more with Eastern religions. What does that mean? You can look at God as energy and probability and consciousness. And if you think about religion in that perspective, you can get into the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. Now this suggests, right, that subatomic particles act as both particles and waves. They exist either as a particle or wave depending on your observation. So the important part about this from a metaphysics standpoint is that literally the way you view reality is constructed in part by the way you observe reality. So if you think about it, what you see is going to construct your reality at a kind of a baseline, in a baseline way. So put simply, you can think of science, you can think of the universe as just simply consciousness and the existence of that consciousness. So again, energy like you has no beginning and no end. It can never be destroyed. It is only ever in shifting states. This idea of we're all interconnected through matter, and that interconnection is incredible and also overwhelming in a religious sense. Finally, if we think about cosmic matter, most of what we see or can consider is not visible, right? Or can see is not visible. That doesn't make any sense. But the point is that we have large amounts of the known universe, which are dark energy and dark matter. So they only exist theoretically. I guess that's my point. It's theoretical. It's not visual. So we continue to study the universe. We study the physical universe, but a lot of what we're looking at now, or that the cosmologists are looking at, is theoretical. So try to summarize these big ideas pretty simply. There is a naturalist, realist way of looking at the world, a mechanical view of the world, which you believe in that God created this universe for the purposes of sustaining human life. That's the idea that we're in this sort of large machine of a universe that creates physical forces that allows us to exist. Or if you want to think about it from a more Eastern perspective, the real reality of our universe is at the subatomic level, and we get to reality by consciousness. We get to reality by literally going inside and thinking about things. So if God is energy, consciousness, and awareness, a Buddhist would say, of course, that's the way it works, right? That's why we spend so much time meditating. We get in touch with our inner self, and when we get into our inner self, we also get in touch with larger realities. And lifelong meditators, whether they are Hindu or Buddhists, say this all the time. They're kind of coming to a truth, you could call it a religious truth, that kind of aligns with science. That's kind of interesting. So, big picture. Do religion and science work together? Can they work together, or are they at odds? That's the question I want you to think about. Good luck with it. I hope this was clear enough, and I'm trying to make it under 15 minutes. So I'm going to stop right here.